Welcome, everyone. We are so glad that you are joining us today. I'm very excited to introduce our special guest, Julie Bjelland. Julie is a psychotherapist, the host of the HSP Podcast, the founder of the Sensitive Empowerment Community. She's got the HSPs and Heart-Centered Business Group and the HSP Dating Group. Julie is a powerhouse, and her mission is to teach you how to balance and honor your sensitive nervous system, understand your incredible value, love who you are, and empower you to bloom into your highest potential. Julie, it is such a pleasure to have you joining us today. Welcome.
Thank you so much. I'm excited to talk today about my favorite subject.
Likewise, I think you and I are going to have a very exciting conversation here. So before we get into the nitty gritty of things, I'm hoping that for those who are listening who aren't familiar with your name, your work, if you can just share a little bit of an overview about the work that you do and maybe how you came to do it, the path that led you here.
Yes, well, I am a psychotherapist that specializes in the trait of high sensitivity. And I identify as an HSP empath myself, which really means that we're kind of at the highest level of sensitivity. And life can be pretty challenging like that. So I really got incredibly passionate and dedicated about how can we make life a little easier for us, because the world's not really set up for those with really high sensitivity. So we can have a lot of sensory overload and a lot of challenges, but there's so many gifts too. So that's a big part of my mission in general, is to help HSPs kind of remove that layer of overwhelm and challenge so that they can access their many amazing gifts that the world needs. So that's a big part of my mission.
Yes, I love it. I'm on that mission with you. I think that's, everybody involved in this summit, that's why we're doing this, right? Because we know that HSPs deserve to thrive and that sometimes there are just some challenges to get there. So I'm curious if you can speak, because you've got such a vast background in this, to some of the common challenges that you see HSPs and empaths having that lead them to maybe seek out psychotherapy or other healing modalities. Like what are the common challenges that you see in HSPs that you can really help them with?
Yes, well, I've been researching a lot around sensory overload. That's a big one for a lot of us high up on that sensitivity scale. And that shows up in lots of different ways. We can have mental health challenges, we can have physical health challenges. And also, in general, a lot of us received messages that something's wrong with being sensitive. So we've got that extra weight and this burden walking around thinking there's something wrong with us. So it's become really important to me to shift that message and really create a paradigm shift about it, that in fact, we have these sensitivities for a reason. And I'm always telling HSPs, we call them highly sensitive people, that you're not too sensitive. It's that the modern world is too loud and chaotic. That's what's wrong. It's not you that's wrong. And then your sensitivities are not wrong. And we really have to do specific things that support our sensitivities when we're living amongst modern society.
I love that. I grew up often hearing I was too sensitive, too intense, too dramatic, too much. I am of that smaller percentage of HSPs that is extroverted. I also identify as being strong-willed. I am a sensation seeker, so I'm not the typical HSP. And so I can imagine that in childhood, I was too much, just too much for everybody around me. I often felt like too much for myself. So I really resonate with everything that you're sharing here. And I empathize with those HSPs who are listening, who are still feeling that way. I know for me, it took a lot of personal work and self-journey to get to a place where it didn't feel too much. It felt like the right amount for me, maybe too much for others, but for me, it was just right. So I'm curious if you can just share maybe some of the tools or the healing modalities that you use with your clients, with the people that are in your community, that help them to feel more imbalanced with themselves so that they don't have that too muchness that I think so many of us identify with.
Yeah, and I'm so sorry you got those messages too. I got those. I identify as a HSP empath, introvert, And I also have the trait, the high sensation seeking. So that's a complicated mixture as well. And, so many times we walk around in the world when we really are thinking something's wrong with us, it does impact absolutely everything about our lives. So spending time with other sensitive people is a big one to really normalize and validate your experiences in the world, and to do specific things that I call it slow down the nervous system motor. Little things like even closing your eyes a little bit throughout the day is a big one, because about 80% of our stimulation is visual. One of my favorite things to recommend people who feel burnt out is to get time in nature alone, because nature has a really healing capacity for us. It really gives us and feeds us a lot of energy. And making sure that you are spending time alone. I believe especially HSP empaths need to have a quiet place in their home that's just theirs, that they can close the door and be in that space to really, because if you're thinking about the nervous system as being a container, an HSP might have 100 cups of information dumped into that container, whereas 80% or more of the population only has a few cups. So that's part of the reason why we're so overloaded, is we're really taking in a lot of information, a lot of data. We're reading micro expressions and energy that other people miss. And if we are just kind of walking around in the world, I used to say, like before I knew about this trait and supported myself with it, that I felt like I was this raw, exposed nerve. Like I needed some armor on me to protect myself. I felt so sensitive and so beaten down and so overwhelmed. I thought I wasn't smart. I thought I wasn't capable. I was depressed and anxious. These are actually pretty common for a lot of sensitive people. And unfortunately, a lot of medical and mental health providers don't know about these traits, and HSPs are getting misdiagnosed, put on medication they don't need that's actually making it worse, when in fact doing things like a breath technique to slow down the heart rate, or giving yourselves those little bit of mindfulness and meditation breaks throughout the day, and having that alone time every day, getting into nature every day, these are things that will absolutely help us thrive.
Yeah, I love those. Simple techniques, because even as you're talking about 80% of stimulation being visual and taking these little breaks throughout the day, I'm thinking about myself. I'm on Zoom working with clients, or I'm responding to emails, or when I give myself a little break and I go outside with my dog, I'm usually looking at Facebook or the news, or it becomes more and more challenging in our modern world to unplug from visual stimulation, from technology. Even when I'm alone, I'm still connected, although I wouldn't say I'm feeling connection to people. It's like I'm still plugged in to the matrix. And so I like these ideas about giving yourself these small breaks. Doesn't sound like you're talking about any big grand changes. It's more like these little things that we can do that will help us to prevent reaching that overstimulation or that overwhelm that HSPs are prone to reaching.
Absolutely. I'm glad you mentioned the news and social media, because in fact, for those of us high up on that scale that identifies HSP empaths, I actually recommend that you don't visually watch news. It can be too overstimulating, too overwhelming, and we're not going to be beneficial to the world if we're falling apart. And it is common to be constantly connected to social media. Social media has gotten incredibly negative and overwhelming. It's just too much all the time. So, and yet that's kind of what society has turned into. So we do have to actually do things differently than those around us. Read the news rather than watch it. And also it takes up to 8 positives to neutralize 1 negative in the brain. That means you've got to do a lot of positive filling up too. So read the good stuff that's happening in the world also, because there's a lot of really good people. I always say, look for the helpers, look for the good stories too, and the good people in the world doing good things, and be intentional about that positivity fill up. And it also takes up to 20 to 30 seconds for positivity to really absorb into the brain, whereas negative is instant. So it actually, how often are we really stopping when we're not being mindful and soaking that in? Even, the glorious masterpiece of a sunrise and sunset every day that we're given. These are great times to intentionally slow down and really soak in the beauty that's around us.
See much more in related article.